There is something extremely satisfying about the end of the year. There's a certain catharsis that comes with looking back one final time and reflecting on what the last 365 days brought us and what promise it had back when it all began. One can only hope that that retrospection isn't going to bite you in the ass. All that being said, with 11 episodes currently under my belt for the year, I'm not quite at the stage where I can sign off and ride into the sunset, so let's punch in one more for the history books, shall we? Since I've got year end on the mind, as do most people, tradition on this channel dictates that we switch things up for one final hoorah and send this year off in style. Giving the random anime generator a break for the holidays, I've selected 3 shows off the seasonal charts that my schedule says I don't quite have time for, but looked interesting enough to at least give them a chance to convince me otherwise. They've got 3 episodes to convince me to bring them to completion or else die in the vine as I move on with my life to hopefully greener pastures. In theory, these should be the easiest no-brainer clears of the year, but history says otherwise, and I have nobody to blame but myself. To err is to be human. You know, for as much as I throw the term around fairly negatively on this channel, I don't necessarily think that slop is all that bad. I mean, I like me a nice, meaty artho film every now and then, but life is cruel, and sometimes I need to palate cleanse between servings to not get too fatigued. Watching anime is like a marathon meal. You gotta know how to pace yourself and keep too many of the same flavors at once from ruining your progress. Sometimes you've gotta wash down your heavy carbs with something a little lighter, and it turns out, at least for anime, slop is a pretty good way to do exactly that. Released in the heavily crowded summer season, Cultural Exchange with a Game Center Girl tells the story of Game Center clerk Renji Kusakabe. While working his shift on Valentine's Day, Renji helps a young English girl by the name of Lily Baker get a koala plushie she was desperately trying to win. Lily's Japanese isn't all that great, and neither is Renji's cultural awareness, as upon gifting Lily the koala, Renji accidentally causes the young lass to fall for him, mistaking it for a Valentine's Day gift and an expression of his love. Realizing that a relationship with a middle schooler is going to get him locked away where the sun don't shine, Renji rejects the advances of the slightly dim-witted Lily, but the stubborn middle schooler is absolutely determined to make him hers, whatever the cost. Across the entire year, 2025 has not been lacking for good slice-of-life anime, so it isn't too surprising that Game Center Girl got as overlooked as it did in favor of more robust options. Still, despite that, the show is remarkably not terrible. Despite the animation being a little lacking at times, the show opts for this really charming art style with vibrant colors that make the show feel comfortable and playful without coming off as overly sentimental. Despite a concept that does read like something that's going to get you put on a list, the show does manage its premise pretty well, with a surprising comedic bite courtesy of Lily's brazen approach to romance and the rest of the cast not exactly helping to defuse the situation. The language barrier bit has been done to death before and does threaten to wear thin easily, but by building out a surprisingly enjoyable side cast, it keeps itself feeling lively throughout as just some good cheap fun that doesn't ask you to take it all too seriously. I'll also throw it out there that the English dub is just pure 10 out of 10 cinema. It does lack Sally Amaki's glorious performance hamming up her English for comedic effect. However, it makes up for it by replacing the Japanese-English language barrier of the sub with Lily speaking in a British accent, which is just so fucking hilarious. Like, yeah, I mean, I can't understand what those Brit-bongs are saying half the time either, but then the rest of the cast starts speaking to her in a British accent, and somewhere along the line, we've just completely lost the plot, and I love it. On the other side of the coin, though, while the art style is fairly charming, Game Center Girl's animation is a bit lacking. You can really feel the budget weighing the show down in some places, and it becomes more apparent the longer you watch. It does work to cheese up the comedy a bit, but still feels more like them trying to make the most out of a bad situation than being a deliberate design choice. The concept itself also isn't going to be everyone's cup of tea, as the series has to tiptoe real carefully to keep Renji and Lily's relationship from going away from an unrequited childhood crush to Usagi dropping the ball. That definitely becomes more of a concern if the show does try to end up having a more emotional climax, but I guess that's more speculative on my part than maybe is fair. I don't know, I've been burned before, and I'm not exactly looking to celebrate the new year from the burn center, now am I?
どんな遠い道のりでも踏み出す一歩目の勇気があったんだ
Man, I have nobody to blame here but myself. This time last year, I sat down and remarked how few isekai I've sat through on this series, and as if by some cosmic joke, it seems the heavens listened and gifted me 11 whole isekai or isekai-style fantasy this year alone. Hopefully, by now I've atoned for my sins, but we might as well round that to a nice even 12 just to be safe. There is a part of me that is at least fascinated by the state of the modern fantasy genre, and does have a small glimmer of hope that things could maybe turn themselves around. Despite my dismissiveness, I do walk into every new entry with the hope of being proven wrong, and that maybe the appeal of it all, besides being a complete slop farm, will come to me. Not sure how many more series it will take to get there, but it's worth the effort. Airing last spring, From Old Country Bumpkin to Master Swordsman is not an isekai, but is a light novel fantasy set in a very similar setting, so close enough. Our story follows the grizzled Beryl Gardenant, a master sword fighter living in the boonies who has trained many acclaimed warriors from his dojo. Beryl is content to live a modest life, but is whisked away to join the Order of the Knights as an instructor by a former student of his looking for her master's greatness to be known to the world, among other things. To its credit, From Old Country Bumpkin does have quite a bit going for it on the surface that makes this more than just an obligatory slop series to fill a quota. The show does take itself rather seriously, which is an oddity in a genre overrun with comedic takes, complete with an earthier color palette reminiscent of series like Mushoku Tensei and Grand Blue Fantasy, which aren't terrible comparisons to be making here. Having an older, more storied protagonist also helps in this regard, as he's more than just your usual audience surrogate. He does have his OP moments, but they do feel a tad more justified given his training and work largely in service of the narrative. Reading this out for the first time, I realized that maybe the real issue is that my bar for light novel fantasy works is in the mantle, but oh well. The animation is generally pretty solid, and I like the designs, so there's a surprising amount to go off of here. However, while I have no issues with the show on a conceptual level, its execution is surprisingly sloppy. The series based on light novels have never been all that great at writing dialogue, but it feels particularly jarring when everything else feels like it's going for an entirely different vibe. The pacing of conversations is all over the place, with scenes that never give you time to breathe in a very unintentional way. Nothing it says is interesting, and if it was, it's not like there's enough breathing room here to really give you time to process it. Which is really weird, given that it isn't as much a general pacing issue either, since the show, at least at the start, does meander quite a bit. If the series laid off on the exposition and plot progression and just let you sit down and take in the sights and sounds for a bit, I can see this being a much better series than it was, but the lack of these slower moments really weigh on the series and make it difficult to see it living up to its potential. It's not like the driving narrative is all that strong either, so you end up with basically an early slice of life arc that isn't exactly written as one, and a promise, I guess, that we'll get to some form of generic heroing stuff. Eventually, they build me up just to tear me down.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Romance anime in 2025 was surprisingly sparse, actually. While every other genre seemed to be pumping out quality titles like it's no one's business, the amount of high-quality romance options felt weirdly lacking this year. Ignoring a series with romance elements like Dan Da Dan, for pure romances, your two biggest titles were Fragrant Flower and My Dress Up Darling Season 2. And if you're looking for something a little more platonic and harder on the comedy, then I guess you had Witch Watch. Beyond that though, while there was quite a bit of slop, there wasn't a whole lot else. Maybe we're on the backswing of this trend. Released in the winter season, and marking the only series here I didn't have a good excuse for ignoring, Honey Lemon Soda is a romantic drama following the love escapades of one Uka Ishimori. In middle school, Uka was bullied relentlessly and given the nickname Stone by her classmates for her shyness and lack of expression. Looking to start anew, she enrolls at Hachimitsu High School, where on her first day, she meets the school's resident hot guy, Kai Miura, after he accidentally splashes her with his lemon soda. Not too surprised by more business as usual, Uka is eventually surprised when Kai starts doing random acts of kindness for her, and the story follows their budding tender relationship from there. I have, for a while now, had a hankering for a nice, meaty romance anime, and Honey Lemon Soda almost gets there. Seeing a relationship grow from the start is a nice change of pace from the usual sea of now we're dating I guess anime out there. It does allow for a pretty sweet relationship to form between its core cast. The story is a little heavy on the average girl gets in a relationship with the handsome prince trope, but what's a few tropes among friends? As it turns out, a lot actually. I think part of the reason the genre ended up pivoting more towards the com than the rom is that romance is really hard to write convincingly. You can mask a lot more big personalities behind the bluntness of a comedic series, and likewise, hide the fact you don't plan on progressing the narrative in any meaningful way. You can also spice your story up with gimmicks that can give it some flair even if the core romance isn't all that good, which unfortunately leaves the gimmickless Honey Lemon Soda laid bare for the world to see. I'm gonna once again be a bit of a broken record, but like with most shows of this ilk, where Honey Lemon Soda falls apart is in its character writing. I said before that having two stoic characters doesn't really make for a compelling relationship, and that holds true here, where the attempt at intimacy the show creates come off more like a conversation between two pieces of cardboard. Uka is just a bit too shy for her own good, and the enigmatic Kai doesn't pick up the slack either. A lot of the drama surrounding Uka's past comes off as contrived and overdone, and without a strong foundation, the story never really picks up from there, ending up doing the worst thing a romance can do and make me not care one bit about our main duo. The side cast isn't carrying water either, being largely forgettable, and while the art is fine, it likewise isn't holding the series up enough to really sell it to me. I have heard pretty decent things about this one from manga readers and shoujo fanatics alike, and a rough start isn't impossible to come back from, but in a world where there are just so many other options out there, I think I'm gonna have to sleep on it and see how I feel when I come back to it. It'll give me the perfect opportunity to dream up my perfect romance series. Cultural Exchange with the Game Center Girl is a pretty good case of a show having iffy production, but making up for it with some pretty fun overall art direction. Throw in a plain adorable MC, and the final result is an easy decision to watch to completion. It's not uncommon for a comedy series to come off as a one-trick pony, but Lily, being as great a character as she is, along with a surprisingly strong sidecast beyond that, keeps the show from stagnating and staying fresh until the very end. Some places show its weaker production more than others, but for a mildly campy series like this one, it works well enough. Both the dub and subcast seem to really be giving it their all, and Lily's performance in either never fails to put a grin on my face. Overall, just a blast to watch, and while probably not quite anime of the year material, was a pleasant surprise that more or less justifies my intentions here with this episode. From Country Bumpkin to Master Swordsman starts off pretty promising, and does have some surprising depth to its swordplay and art direction. However, in what is kind of a bizarre twist, the writing is just bad enough in fairly strange ways to keep me from wanting more. The dialogue belies the series' loftier ambitions, the pacing of which never seems to give the atmosphere the right amount of room to breathe. Maybe I'm just tripping, as the bones here do seem pretty solid, but I gotta make my call and stick with it, and the only place this one is going to is the dropped list. Lastly, to wrap up the year, Honey Lemon Soda sure was a bit of a letdown. I can usually tolerate a reasonable degree of melodrama, but the show never hooked me beyond that, and its pretty blunt characters just solidified its new home on the dropped list. The art and animation is fine by itself, but none of it is spectacular enough to pull up the writing, and I just didn't feel like trudging through the melodrama for what I presume is a fairly half-baked, half-finished ending when all is said and done. In the weirdest 11th hour twist of 2025, the worst thing of the episode wasn't the Naro fantasy adaptation for once. With that said, for one final time in 2025, we have in fact reached the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed and that I was able to narrow down your planning list. Let me know down below your thoughts on the series discussed here today, and hit that subscribe button if you want to see more videos like this one in the future. If my voice is a little off this episode, I do apologize, as I caught a holiday bug, and the tight deadline meant that I couldn't just wait it out like I normally would. As some closing notes, 2025 was a pretty alright year for this series. I definitely felt like I was starting to figure out the pipeline a little better, at least towards the end, to get these episodes out more on time than I seemed to be able to do previously. I had a lot of fun writing some of my favorite segments in the entire series and trying to constantly push myself across the year. And we celebrated some moderate success with a few of the episodes too, so always gonna like that. The goal for 26 is to make that a little more consistent, but with life being the way that it is, who knows if that will come to fruition. All I can do is give it my all and hope for the best. I've got a lot of big plans for the new year, including my big year-end top 10 anime of 2025. And if you want to catch all of that as it comes out, make sure to hit that subscribe button. And you can navigate over to the playlist down below if you want to see more videos in this series while you wait. You can follow me on these sites here for a variety of other content that I put out as well. And until next year, remember to stay salty.